So one of my all-time favorite things in the whole wide world, I'm telling a story on my wife, just so y'all know, but one of my all-time favorite things in the whole wide world is for Heather to get really, really tired and then to either watch funny videos online or to tell funny stories and to get her to the point where she can barely breathe and her face turns real red and she'll start crying. It brings joy to my heart in those moments when that happens. And we go to bed pretty early, so it doesn't happen very often. It's usually when we're with family or our schedule's a little bit thrown off. But of all the times that has ever happened, there was one night in particular where it didn't just happen to Heather, it happened to me, and it happened to my mother when she was living with us. And we talked about it this week, and Scout said that Scout would want us to stay in the living room until she was completely asleep and when she was little. And so she actually came out and thought there was like something really bad had happened because she comes out into the living room and all three of us are crying and thought like something really bad had happened. But what had happened was this. We were tired. We had been watching different things on TV, and we pulled up on YouTube a video of bloopers from game shows. And we were watching these bloopers, and one of them that took place was it's kind of a family story now because it was so bad. I will say that it ended up with my mother having to run to the restroom. It was one of those moments. But it just was one of those things that just struck us unbelievably funny. So let me give you the setup. So the setup was on Family Feud. I looked it up. It was September of 1982 is when this episode aired. And Richard Dawson, if some of y'all remember him, he was the host. And so they get up there, and it's like probably the second or third person, to come up, and they have their hand behind their back or whatever, and they'd have to slap the thing. And so the question was this, all right? Name, either fictional or real, a famous person with the name Willie. Now, we're going to watch the video here in just a second, but let me just kind of set it up for you. Now, I know for some of us who are like, I don't know anybody named Willie. So let me just tell you, 1982, the answers that I would have said if I was thinking correctly, and the answers that were on the board, we're not going to watch the whole clip, but number one was Willie Nelson. All right, y'all know Willie Mays was up there, baseball player. Willie Robertson was still a little child, so he was not on the board in 1982. And then the one that was actually last on there that I thought would be much higher was Willy Wonka. All right, so those are, just to kind of give you some people, those are good answers. Willie Nelson was number one, which they actually never got. But I want y'all to see the clip to see what brought my wife, my mother, and myself into utter tears. Now, let me just, before we watch it, tell you, hopefully y'all aren't as tired as we were that night. And so you're going to be like, John, that's not that funny. It was the funniest thing that has ever happened to us. Like it was just unbelievable. So we're going to watch the clip, see if y'all know about this famous Willie.
People survey, top 6 answers on the board. Here is the question: real or fictional? Name a famous Willie. You'll be third. Yes.
Willie Loman?
Willie Loman, death of a salesman. No?
That was a goodie.
Willie the Pooh?
Take a look. Willie the Pooh.
All right, so Willie the Pooh, all right? As y'all see, it was not up there. And I don't know, so in our home, we still just laugh about the Willie the Pooh incident. It was like my mom didn't even understand what he said, and I could not even repeat it. It took me 3 or 4 minutes to even be able to say the words on that night. So for us, it's one of those moments. But I tell you that to say we're going to talk a lot about laughter today. And one of the things that I want you to be thinking about with laughter is we kind of ask the question of what makes us laugh. And for most of us, the answer is, well, when something is funny, that makes us laugh. And we could even kind of break that down a little bit farther of what makes something funny. And we understand from some of the great stand-up comedians will tell you, it's what makes something funny is surprise. For us, watching that clip, you can think, well, the obvious answers would be Willie Nelson, Willie Mays, Willy Wonka. Willie the Pooh was not on our list, and that was a surprise to us, and that made it funny. And so something about the laughter is about that surprise. So why do we laugh? Well, we laugh because something is funny. Something surprises us. But we also laugh, and my daughter Scout, as y'all all know, she inherited this from her father. Sometimes we laugh because something's awkward or uncomfortable. Scout's very good at that. She laughs at inopportune times. I do the same thing. Which we won't tell any stories about that. I have some, but I won't. Sometimes we laugh because something is awkward. Sometimes we laugh because we don't know what else to do. Sometimes we laugh because of deep hurt, where we are broken and we are hurt and we just don't know how else to respond. Sometimes we laugh because of cynicism, because we know whatever is being said, there's no way that it could actually come to fruition. There's no way it could ever be true, and we are cynical, and we laugh about it. And sometimes, one of the best ones is we laugh because of surprise. But a surprise is more than a surprise of saying Willie the Pooh, but the surprise is a celebration of life. That something marvelous has happened, something grand has happened, and it makes us laugh. And those things are things that remind us about what life is, and we're reminded of why we laugh. And so today I want to talk about those things as we go through. But as we go through, if you remember, we are in the second week of walking through the Old Testament. We were with Adam and Eve. Last week we have jumped very far through the story into Abraham and Sarah. A couple things that we have missed as we've walked through that, just to give you a little bit of context. We skipped over Noah, the Tower of Babel. We have the call of Abraham, which is an important piece of this story. The call of Abraham starts in Genesis chapter 12. I don't have these up on the screen, but I just want you to hear these words from Genesis chapter 12. It says, "The Lord said to Abram, 'Go from your land, your relatives, and your father's house to the land I will show you. And I will make you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse anyone who treats you with contempt. And all the people on the earth will be blessed through you.'" And so we have the call of Abram at that point. His name's going to be changed to Abraham in just a few chapters. We have the call of Abram. We move into there of the story of his nephew Lot. We're introduced to Sodom and Gomorrah there in chapter 14. And then we have in chapter 15 Abraham's vision. And with this vision, there is a covenant that takes place. And so we have those up on the screen through that. And so chapter 15, verses 1 through 6, say, "After these events, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. 'Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward will be very great.' But Abram said, 'Lord God, what can you give me, since I am childless, and an heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus?' Abram continued, 'Look, you have given me no offspring, so a slave born in my house will be my heir.' Now the word of the Lord came to him, 'This one will not be your heir. Instead, the one who comes from your own body will be your heir.' He took him outside and said, 'Look at the sky and count the stars. If you are able to count them.' Then he said to him, 'Your offspring will be as numerous.'" In verse 6, just at the very beginning, Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. Abraham believed what God had told him. So he believes in this promise. He believes in what's taking place. But he says, and I want you to, so we go through the story. So we have the Hagar, as I mentioned earlier, Hagar and Ishmael. Then we go into chapter 17. We have this next little piece of the story with chapter 17, verse 15. God said to Abraham, we're kind of just moving through this part of it quickly. I don't know, maybe I don't have this on the screen. Verse 15 through 16, God said to Abraham, As for your wife Sarai, do not call her Sarai, for Sarah will be her name. I will bless you, or I will bless her. Indeed, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she will produce nations. Not a nation, she will produce nations. Kings of people will come from her. So verse 15 and 16, I've got a little outline up here that I want you to see. Look at what God says to Abraham concerning his wife Sarah. I will bless her. I will give you a son by her, not by Hagar. I will give you a son by her. I will bless her. She will produce nations, plural, and kings of people will come from her. Now, I want you to see this because I want you to remember the context of what Abraham is, what's going on. He is an old man. His wife is old. God has made promises to them, but they have been kind of surrounded by these promises, realizing that there's only one way this happens. She has to have a child, and she is without a child. And God says, I will bless her. I'm giving you my word. I will give you a son by her. I will bless her. She will produce nations. Kings are going to come from her. These are incredible promises, and these are grand promises. And so what is Abraham's response? What if God says these things to you, what is your proper response? Let's look at Abraham's response. Verse 17 gives us the response. Abraham fell face down. What did he do? He laughed. Then he laughed and said to himself, can a child be born to a 100-year-old man? Can Sarah, a 90-year-old woman, give birth? Now, I don't know about you, but we all know the answer to that question. What God is promising is impossible. And so Abraham laughs. But my question to you is, why did Abraham laugh? Was it funny? Was it a surprise? Was it awkward? Maybe a little bit. Or was the laughter because he didn't know what else to do and was consumed by a deep hurt? Consumed by something in his heart that hurt him, that hurt Sarah. Did he laugh because of cynicism, or did he laugh because of a celebration of life? And I think this story comes to us and reminds us of those reasons why we laugh. So let's go into our text today. So we are at chapter 18. We are going to read a little bit of a long passage, but it goes down through verse 15. So chapter 18, 1 down through 15. It said, the Lord appeared to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent, and during the heat of the day, he took up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them, bowed to the ground, and said, my Lord, if I have found favor with you, please do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought, that you may wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. I will bring you a bit of bread so that you may strengthen yourselves. This is why you have passed your servant's way. Later you can continue on. Yes, they replied, do as you have said. Now let's just pause there just for a moment. We'll come back to verse 6. We've talked about this, and a couple summers ago I did a series about the Trinity, and we talked about this passage, and this is one of the passages most theologians think that God is a part of this passage, and we know God's a part of it somehow. If this is the Trinity, there's a lot kind of going on in that. But that's not where I want to focus today. I want to focus on what Abraham said, and I want you to kind of see what's going on. Abraham says to these 3 men, let me get you just a bit of water so you can wash your feet, hang out under this tree, and I'll find you a little bit of bread. I'm just going to make sure that you just have enough for your journey. So what does Abraham do? So we pick up verse 6, and in verse 6 it says, so Abraham hurried into the tent and said to Sarah, quick. Now remember, we're plus 90 years old at this point. Quick. Need 3 measures of fine flour, What he's saying here is the barley over here, that's the kind of the junk flour that we use for our own kind of what we eat on a daily basis. Don't use the barley. It's the cheap stuff. Get the fine flour. Need 3 measures of fine flour and make bread, because we all make bread very quickly, right? So she begins to make bread. Verse 7, Abraham ran to the herd and got a tender choice calf. We would call this veal. He gets the tender choice calf, gave it to a young man who hurried to prepare it. Don't forget, what did Abraham say to the visitors? Let me just get you a little bit of water, a little bit of bread, y'all hang out here. So we've now made bread out of the finest flour. We have killed the young calf. Abraham took curds and milk as well as the calf that he had prepared and set them before the men. He served them as they ate under the tree. So Abraham recognizes that something important is going on. And he goes to the extremes, goes through the abundance to prepare a meal for them, to make sure that they are comfortable. So as they are there, they say to him, verse 9, "Where is your wife Sarah?" they asked him. "There in the tent," he answered. "The Lord said, I will certainly come back to you in about a year's time, and your wife Sarah will have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent behind them. And Abraham and Sarah were old and getting on in years. Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. So she laughed to herself. "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I have delight?" Why do we laugh? Do you think Sarah thought this was funny? Or do you think that Sarah had a deep hurt in her heart? She didn't know what else to do but to laugh. And maybe Sarah was a little cynical. God has made a promise to her. You will have a great nation, and she is 90 years old, and she laughs. Verse 13, "But the Lord asked Abraham, why did Sarah laugh?" That's where we're like, we think we all know why she laughed. Saying, why did Sarah laugh? Saying, "Can I really have a baby when I'm old? Is anything impossible for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will come back to you. In about a year, she will have a son." Verse 15, Sarah denied it. "I did not laugh," she said, because she was afraid. But he replied, "No, you did laugh." So this story is one that we know and one that we have heard, and it's a little bit easier for us to stomach because we know the rest of the story, and we know about Isaac, and we know what happens, and we know the fact that we have a world religion of the Jewish faith that all comes back to this story and back to Abraham and Sarah. We know all of that. But just for a moment, to put ourselves into Sarah's shoes, to ask the question, why did she laugh? Maybe a better question to ask you this morning is, what has God promised you? Is there something in your life that you have to step out on faith? Is there something in your life that when you think about it, you laugh? Not because it's funny, but the laughter comes out of the deepest part of your soul. The part of your life that carries all the hurt, the part of your life, the part of your soul when you don't know what else to do but laugh. What has God promised you? Then we get to verse 14. Verse 14 that says to us, "Is anything impossible with God? Or is anything impossible for the Lord?" Now, just kind of a to help you kind of process it, as I was studying this week, the way that we usually translate this passage is anything impossible for the Lord, but there's actually a couple other translations here as well. Some people will translate, which we're probably pretty comfortable with, is anything too hard for the Lord. Too hard, impossible, that's not that different. But as I was working, I read another translation that a lady had said that I just thought, I don't even know what to do with that. She said another way that we could translate this word is anything too wonderful for the Lord? Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? You see, the problem is in our lives, there are things that get in the way of God's promises. All of us have things that have gotten in the way of what God has promised us. One of the reasons we have been ending our service reading through the same thing every week is I want to remind you that there are things that get in the way of God's promises. Some of the things that get in the way of God's promises that we repeat every single week is sin gets in the way of God's promises. Lies get in the way of God's promises. Evil, darkness, death gets in the way of God's promises. And in this story, barrenness gets in the way of God's promises. And every week, part of what I want us to remember as God's people is, yes, sins, lies, darkness, death, barrenness, these things get in the way of God's promises. But do you know what else there is? There is grace, and there is truth, and there is good, and there is light, and there is life. And in the moment of Sarah's barrenness, where barrenness has gotten in the way of God's promises, there is hope. And God says to them, I'll be back. In a year, I'm coming back. And this barrenness will turn to hope. Do we have the faith? Do we have the faith in our lives to believe that the barrenness in our lives, that there is hope for God's future? Or do we laugh? Is anything impossible for the Lord? That's our question. Is anything impossible for the Lord? And for some of us, in our cynical, hurt moments, the answer might be yes. Maybe sometimes. Abraham and Sarah, I'm 100, she's 90. What you're talking about, it doesn't happen. Is anything impossible for God? And sometimes, at the heart of our hearts, the cynical piece of our lives says, yes, there is. But this is the answer of someone who has chosen to live in a closed universe. In this universe, things are controllable. In this universe, things are reliable. But in the universe of yes, there are things that are impossible for God, is also a universe of hopelessness. Because it is a place of barrenness. Is anything impossible for the Lord? There is actually another answer. We read about this answer in Luke's gospel in the first chapter. It says, the angel replied to her, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore, the Holy One will be born, will be called the Son of God. And consider your relative Elizabeth, for she has conceived a son in her old age. There's a theme, don't miss it. And this is the 6th month for her who is called barren. Verse 37, the angel looks Mary in the face and says to her, for nothing is too impossible. Nothing is too wonderful for God. Nothing is impossible, or nothing will be impossible for God. And Mary replies, see, I am the Lord's servant. May it happen to me as you have said. Is there anything too wonderful for the Lord? Some of us might say yes. And some of us might join Mary and say no. So let me ask you a question. Why do you think that Sarah laughed? Why do you think Sarah laughed that day? Was it funny? Maybe in a little bit of a way. Was it a surprise? Maybe a little bit. Was it awkward? Maybe a little bit. Or did Sarah laugh that day because of the deep hurt that was in her soul? A cynicism that had fallen upon her. And I think the answer is found right there. With the hurt, the cynicism of this isn't possible, Mary laughed. So let me ask you the last question. Where is that place in your heart? The place of barrenness. The place of hopelessness, the place in your heart that used to have joy, or place in your heart that used to have life and hope, because you know Sarah and Abraham had that for many years. But instead of having that place of hope and that place of a future and God's future for them, that place had been replaced with hopelessness and cynicism. Where has hope left in your heart? Where has hope left and been replaced with cynicism? And my question this morning is pretty simple. Is there anything too wonderful for the Lord? If the answer is no, then the laughter of hurt and cynicism turns to laughter of surprise. Look at Genesis chapter 21. If you flip over just a few chapters, we get to chapter 21, verse 6. That should be up on the screen, Emily. I think I have it. Okay, thank you. And Sarah said, God has made me laugh. What do you think this laughter is about? Is it the laughter of cynicism? Is it the laughter of deep hurt? God has made me laugh, and everyone who hears it will laugh with me. You see, I think at the beginning of the story, the laughter comes from that cynicism, comes from that deep hurt. It comes from a place of barrenness, and we get to the end of the story, and Isaac is born, and the words of God have been fulfilled, and the promises of God are starting to be fulfilled. And Sarah says, I'm laughing. It's not because of anything I've done, but it's the promises of God. Is there anything impossible for the Lord? Is there anything too wonderful for the Lord? In our lives this morning, my hope is that as we look at this story, we ask the question, is there anything too wonderful for the Lord? Are we willing to accept God's life? Are we willing to accept God's freedom? Are we willing to entrust our lives to God and to no other? Are we willing to take those places in our hearts, the places of deep hurt, the places where we felt like, well, God, this is how it was supposed to transpire. This is what life was supposed to look like. This is what you were supposed to do. I'm not supposed to be in this situation, or my child's not supposed to be in this situation, or whatever that situation is. This isn't where I'm supposed to be. And God says to you, but I still have promise for you. the place in your life that is filled with hurt, the place that is barren, I still have life there. And we can't help sometimes but laugh. Because we've been so consumed with that and we've been so lost by that. But this morning, the good news of the story is the good news that reaches beyond what we think. It shatters the accepted value systems and what we believe the definition of reality is. Today, as we close the service, I'm going to add another line to what we've been reading every week. That at the end of the service, as we go through and I will read, that we need to be reminded, I'm going to add a new line. That we need to be reminded that barrenness, the loss, the hurt of thinking that God can't fulfill promises, that barrenness doesn't get the last word, but hope does. This morning, for some of us, that might be exactly what we need to hear. That whatever that place in our lives that we have grown to just see as something that we laugh about, not because it's funny, but we laugh out of a deep hurt. We laugh out of a cynicism because we don't believe that God can still work. That my hope and my prayer this morning is that we hear the words of the story. Is there anything impossible for the Lord? No. That even in our hurt, even in our loss, even in your cynicism, God can bring life. God can bring laughter. That God can bring us to join along with Sarah and say, I'm going to laugh, and everyone that sees me, I want them to laugh along with me. Because God has done something great. This morning, as we close, we're going to close as we have been for most weeks. That if you need a pastor to pray with, Pastor James is going to be right over here, and he'd love the opportunity to pray with you. If you need to just come and just say, I've got a place in my heart, a place of hurt, a place of barrenness, a place where laughter doesn't exist. And I want life there. Pastor James would love to be able to pray with you and talk to you about that. Or you might just need to find a place to just pray that prayer by yourself and say, Lord, when I look at that question, is anything impossible for the Lord? My answer is, yeah. I don't think this can be healed. I don't think that you can work here. But Lord, I want to be captured by your promise, by your hope. Barrenness doesn't get the last word, but hope does. Lord, bring hope into my life. Bring hope into the place where I don't see you working. To this person's life where I don't see you working. Bring life, bring hope. You might just need to find a place by yourself to pray that prayer, to give that to the Lord and say, bring me laughter. Laughter of a celebration of life. Not a laughter of cynicism or hurt. For some of you, you might need to be anointed for healing. I would love to be able to do that. I'll be right down here at the altar if you need to be anointed for healing of any type, spiritual, physical, emotional. I would love the opportunity to pray with you. Today, as we sing, may we come knowing that wherever that barrenness is in our heart, there is a God who promises laughter, who promises hope. Let us stand as we sing.